Thanks for joining us on the NRT Now podcast, part of the largest Christian music site online, newreleasetoday.com. Sit back and relax as we chat with your favorite artists, introduce you to new artists, and more. Now here's your host, Jake.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 67. Just want to say thanks so much for joining us here. And if you haven't noticed our graphic already, we are now part of the NRT podcast network, which since it's our network, I think we're automatically already a part of it. But either way, we're excited to have this podcast network, and there's going to be some other podcasts down the line that are going to be awesome. I can't talk about them quite yet, but when the time comes, I will be very excited to tell you about some of the people that are joining us here on the network. So keep an eye out for that, but welcome to our new NRT podcast network here. And before we get into this conversation with Jason Gray here, we tried to have a good surprise for you guys at the end. It didn't work out. You'll hear about it in just a little bit in the episode, but we tried. We weren't able to, but either way, I think you'll really enjoy this conversation with Jason Gray. So without further ado, here we go. We're here with a We Love nominated artist for Album of the Year, the Pop Light. We're here with Jason Gray. He's no stranger to NRT here. If you've read any of the Behind the Song devotionals by Kevin Davis, which there's a ton of them, I think Jason, you're about, what, half of them, Jason?
He has told me that I'm his most featured artist, so.
Yeah, I think Jason Gray's at about 20 Behind the Songs.
It could be because he thinks my songs are awesome, or it could be because I've been in this a long time.
Could be both.
Yeah, so wouldn't that be great if it was both? So yeah.
So glad to have you here. And your album, Order, Disorder, Reorder, it has me all sorts of disordered every time I try to say that. But it is one of 5 nominated for the Pop Light, which is our album of the year. So, man, there's so much music that came out. That's really awesome that you're able to get in this category here. And I think there's a lot of people who consider you a front runner.
Oh, gosh. Well, I feel like an underdog. I saw the other names and albums in the category. I know for sure that they've gotten more radio exposure, but it would be meaningful for this record to gain some kind of recognition just because it was a very important record for me personally. I think it's my best work. I'm probably the proudest of this record than I am of anything else I've ever done. So I'm very honored.
I mean, it's definitely in a tough category. You got Micah Tyler, Ryan Stevenson, Sidewalk Prophets, and We the Kingdom. But I don't know. I don't think there's any underdogs in this category whatsoever.
Yeah. Well.
So before we talk a little bit about the album, there's a couple things I want to just kind of highlight. One of them is the acoustic story times that you've been doing for a while now, if I remember correctly, even before the pandemic and everything.
Yeah.
It's in a coffee shop, or it was in a coffee shop in Nashville, correct?
It was, yeah. We would meet once a month. It was usually on a Tuesday night, and the coffee house would pack out, and I'd have 3 artists there. And the whole idea was when you're in a radio interview, and you'll have to excuse me too. I've got a speech handicap. I'm sure you're aware of that, but for anyone who's tuning in, that's it's just what I do. Hopefully it's endearing. So when you're an artist and you do a lot of radio interviews, you're always kind of up against the clock, and you have to streamline your stories, and you can only speak in half-minute increments, And so acoustic story time, I wanted it to be a little less crafted for the artists. I wanted it to be a little more candid and give them an opportunity to share stories that they don't normally have an opportunity to share. And so we'll do 3 rounds where each artist will take turns playing a song and sharing the story behind it. And it's been great. I love it.
So you've had quite a range of artists, from up-and-comers to some pretty big names. I've seen Austin French go through there, Tim Timmons.
Yeah.
I've seen quite the range of artists come through and be able to participate in that.
Need to Breathe. We've been blessed to have the full spectrum. The hope is when we do it, I usually have 3 guests on. The perfect ingredients are a very well-known, established artist, and then a newer artist, and then like a brand new artist, And I think that usually makes for interesting conversation.
How's that looked through the pandemic? I know Tennessee has been kind of up and down with restrictions, just depending on the time of year and stuff. How's that acoustic storytime looked throughout the last year or so?
We were doing it in the coffee shop before an audience, and that was great to have the energy and the enthusiasm of the audience there, and the audience was always so generous and engaged, and they were great. And then we decided to keep moving ahead with it. And so we started recording it in this living room space. And that's been great too. And what's been interesting about that is I feel like a lot of the conversations have gotten even more intimate, maybe because as artists, I think we're always aware of the crowd and we're always trying to be sensitive to the crowd, and that's great. But when it's just us hanging out in a living room, it's just like we're talking with each other. And so I think it's gotten more conversational in that context, It's been a lot of fun.
So do you think that'll carry through once you get back to the coffee shop and you're able to do that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
So speaking of stories, let's talk a little bit about the Jason Gray story. You were talking a little bit as we're getting set up that you have a story just kind of from your childhood all the way up. So I just want to unpack a little bit about your story. Where do you want to start with that?
I'd say let's start at the beginning. I think there's a through line in my life of the way that God has worked, and it starts at the beginning. I didn't grow up in the church, but I did grow up on the road with my mom's rock and roll bar band. What that looked like is I was a 5-year-old driving around like Minnesota, the Dakotas, Iowa, Wisconsin, in this old converted school bus with my mom and her bandmates. And my dad ran sound in the early days before their divorce. What that looked like is we'd load everything up and drive to a bar somewhere in the States, I mentioned, and then unload everything, set everything up, and then my mom would stick me on a stool at the bar so she could keep an eye on me while she's working, right? While she's on stage, and she's, singing the hits of the Eagles and the Doobie Brothers and Heart. And there I am, a 5-year-old, just hanging out at the bar, And I remember I hated the smoke, but I did have a bottomless glass of root beer and my Star Wars action figures. And so it was a good life, And the truck drivers who were there, I think they missed their own kids probably. And so they really took to me and would hang out with me and teach me how to play pool and all that kind of stuff. It was a great way to grow up. So I didn't grow up in the church, but I did grow up around a lot of music. It's no surprise really that the first time I heard God speak to me was through a song by my favorite artists. The first music I cared about, Simon and Garfunkel, when I was a little kid, 6 years old. I loved Simon and Garfunkel. After that, I loved Kenny Rogers and Kiss, but I won't go into those parts of my story. We'll just stick with the Simon and Garfunkel part. But I remember my parents went through a pretty ugly divorce, and I was caught in the middle of all that. And I remember we moved in to my mom's parents' house for a season. And my grandpa there, he was a good man, but he was an alcoholic. So there was just a lot of chaos in my life at that time, But God knew how to cut through all of that to speak the word that he wanted me to hear, And I remember I was doing errands with my grandpa, and it was the winter, and he pulled into the liquor store. So he left the car running when he went inside. And I'm sitting in the car waiting for my grandpa to come back out. And on the radio comes this song, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Wow. And it was like I felt this benevolent presence in the car with me and just this sense of peace. I heard him whisper to my heart, I want you to know this is how I feel about you. When you're weary, when you're feeling small, when tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all like a bridge over troubled water. I will lay me down for you. I believed it, And years later, I would come to understand that, oh, I think that was God speaking to me. And I'm grateful for that story, because I don't think there wasn't anybody in my life at that time talking to me about God or encouraging me to interpret songs spiritually or anything like that, right? So I don't think I could have made that moment up. I don't think I could have contrived that. So that is something I love about it. The other thing I love about it is how it stands in as a reminder in my life that God is able to make himself heard, right? With or without our help or permission, And in my life, for a little kid, 6 years old, in the land of the Lutherans up in Minnesota, the first time I heard God speak to me, it was through a Jewish agnostic pop singer named Paul Simon from New York, So all that was very meaningful. I would say ever since then, I've experienced music as a way that God speaks. Famed producer Quincy Jones said once in an interview that music is the voice of God. And that lines up with my experience, So all while I was growing up, when my friends were into AC/DC and Quiet Riot and Motley Crue and all that stuff, they were great rock bands of their time. But I was always drawn to more storytelling kind of music that would get to my heart, like Simon and Garfunkel. And I think that's how I've always experienced music, and that's the kind of music that I want to make.
That's incredible. I think it was a couple episodes ago we were hearing from Grace Graber how a song saved her life, through a bunch of stuff. And I think we really underestimate just how powerful music can be when God wants to speak, whether it's worship. It could be a moving Toby Mac song or KB hip hop, or doesn't matter. But, I think sometimes we think like, yeah, that's cool. That's music that's entertaining. But I kind of bounce back and forth personally, just with that realization of just how powerful music can be when God wants to speak.
Yeah. I think the danger can be that we can begin to think that God only speaks through church-approved conduits, I love that quote by Rich Mullins. I don't know if you remember him or not. Hope this isn't too edgy to say here, but he said, God spoke to Balaam through an ass. And so if you happen to find that God is speaking through you, you needn't think too highly of yourself.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's so great. But yeah, God speaks through whatever he wants to, My experience is that he usually speaks to me the most powerfully through unexpected sources. I think that's because I need things to kind of sneak up on me to really grab me, So if things are coming in the front door, it doesn't grab me as much. But if something sneaks in the back door, then it gets me.
Would you say that sometimes our defenses are like in front of us? We have our defenses up and our walls up in front of us. And sometimes it takes getting around the backside, the weak points, that it really takes something to sink in?
I think so too. I think my theory about human nature is that we are, all of us, anxious creatures trying to survive on a hostile planet, and that makes us want to control everything. For me, it's like if I'm singing a hymn or hearing a sermon and I've already decided what I believe about the things I'm hearing and what they're allowed to say to me, then I'm kind of in control of how it's going to affect me. But if God sneaks up on me through an episode of Breaking Bad or through a Simon and Garfunkel song or something like that, I can't control it. It's so unexpected and disruptive, That's my hunch about what's going on with all that.
And I love how you're saying that God doesn't always speak through the church-approved channels, which, I mean, I think there's a lot of healthiness to church-approved channel.
Absolutely.
That, but
I'm not knocking that at all, for sure.
No,
as a place. Yeah.
The church is a very great place to, hear the word. Christian music is great as we run through that land.
Absolutely.
But, it's just striking that we put God in a church box sometimes, just as us, ourselves.
Yeah.
But God continually proves that he's not in our churchy boxes or wherever. He can speak through anything. He can do, or he can be present anywhere.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, I wouldn't want anybody to construe that I don't value the church so thank you for that clarity.
I don't think that's where anybody really
Sure.
went with that one, but it's just one of those
It's
things
a
that
good
just,
thing to state, though. Yeah, absolutely.
you're always in awe of what God can do. Like, we tend to put God in our boxes of what he is, and whether it's political or whatever, we put him in our box. He's in this category, but it's just crazy just how he continually breaks through those boxes that we try and put him in.
And we don't have to go into this because it's probably not what you want to talk about a whole bunch. But one thing that the Lord has been revealing to me, and what I'm really digging in on in my journey now, is really being honest with myself, being brutally honest with myself about how much confirmation bias is at work. I experience myself as a person who's come to my convictions and my belief through discernment and careful consideration and study and all those things. And that's just not really how it works. We see the evidence that supports what we already believe. I'm trying to disarm as much of that as I can. So like an example is, I was a part of a very legalistic church very early on in my faith walk, experienced a lot of, I don't like to use the word spiritual abuse, but it wasn't healthy for me.
Yeah.
And when I came out of it, when I'd read my Bible, it would still bark at me in the same tone that I'd been conditioned to hear it from the pulpit. I believe the Holy Spirit prompted me to set down my Bible for a year. I didn't read my Bible for a whole year. At that time in my life, that felt revolutionary, especially since I came from a legalistic background. Like, no, man, you got to read your Bible every day. I'm convinced that I was clearly prompted to do that. And then when I felt like I was supposed to pick it back up again, it's like that time away from it had allowed that tone to be purged from it. And I was reading it like it was brand new and on its own terms, so that was very helpful to me. I think we need a lot of resets like that,
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And I think that really goes against our human nature a lot of times, because we always seek our own tribe. We always seek our own confirmation bias, and it's something that really goes against the grain for us to put that down and just try and step out of our own confirmation bias zones or our own tribes, or however we want to put that.
I don't want to get political here, but I think this is a nonpartisan observation. When I hear conservatives barking back saying, no, all lives matter. And when I hear liberals, progressives barking back, never Trump, what I hear in that is two groups of people who are failing to be curious with each other and want to kind of dig down into what they already know. And I heard this great quote this week. He said, you can love what you know, or you can love what you don't know. And there's a lot more that you don't know. So pick what you love wisely. And for me, what that has meant, I've had to fall in love with the things I don't know and be curious. So this last election, I realized who I was going to vote for, and I was surprised by it. I thought, oh, this is kind of unexpected for me where I've landed. And so I decided to call a friend of mine who I knew was voting for the other candidate, and I respect him. I said, hey, this is who I'm going to vote for. I'm surprised by it, and I wonder, would you be willing to argue with me? And so we spent a month calling each other a couple hours at a time and just kind of talking through where we've landed. And that was just so useful. We both still voted for our respective candidates that we had already, but I learned a lot, and hopefully he did too. I wish we could have more conversation like that. I think we can only have conversation like that if we learn how to fall in love with what we don't know, and we learn how to be curious, but I'm getting political. I'm going to get all kinds of comments on Instagram now for all this. So I'm sorry to drag you into all this, but I don't think anything I'm saying is controversial.
No.
But whenever I've spoken these things, oh man, so many people get angry, but.
So our first episode of 2021 was a guy by the name of Legend. And this was pretty much the whole topic of the episode.
Yeah.
Just, he's done a lot of work in that space about coming to the middle. So, I think that's something that we really need to hear. It's uncomfortable, and sometimes it sucks, but it's something that we really need to confront, especially as Christians. Everybody else is going crazy. They're stuck in their trenches and all that. There are definitely things that we need to have convictions for,
Yeah.
But some of the things that we dig in for are just
Yeah.
asinine.
And if my conviction is really real, if I'm more than just ideologically possessed, right?
Yep.
But it's coming from a place of real truth, I'm not afraid to hear what you have to say, right? Like if I'm a conservative, you're a progressive, then tell me what you know. You see the world differently than I do. And actually, if I'm curious with you, I'm going to expand my bag of tricks. I'm going to become more because I'm going to learn how to see the world in some ways that I don't right now. I just think that's so valuable. I've come to a place where I think it's more valuable to be wrong than right. Because if I'm right, I don't learn anything new, right? But if I'm wrong, and if I'm in a conversation with you and you reveal some way that I'm wrong, whoa, that's amazing. I've just learned something new. And man, we need to know everything that we can know, right? My ego still gets in there and I can get defensive and want to win the argument. I'm learning more and more bit by bit to stay curious, to stay in discovery mode. If my convictions are true, then I don't have to be afraid.
I got a funny story on that one. You're talking about being wrong, and sometimes there's value in being wrong and realizing that you're in the wrong. I was at a tech conference years and years ago.
Yeah.
Mythbusters was still on. It was all kind of the rage, and they had them as the guests. They were talking about how failure was their MO. They didn't learn anything unless they failed. So doing it right the whole time, just there was nothing to be gained there. So, I mean, of course, Mythbusters, they did all sorts of stuff that failed spectacularly, almost every episode. Right. So just hearing that talk coming from the NIT background, everything has to run right. Otherwise, people get cranky. So our goal is to get everything right, where their goal is to get everything wrong. And the funny part about that is they're talking about redundancies and stuff. That was kind of the topic. And so a couple of the HP engineers come on board and it's like, well, hey, we know how to blow stuff up too. Here, let's show you how we blow stuff up. And so they blew up a set of servers and stuff. It was hilarious. Completely took the Mythbusters off guard. It was great.
That's awesome. That's so great. Failure is one of the most potent learning opportunities, right? Like once I realized that, I was confronted with a problem that I don't know the answer to yet. You know, just my experience of growing up in the church was that so much of what youth group and the church was orienting me toward was do these things so you don't fail. We want to protect you from failure, you know. But in my life, so very clearly, failure is so valuable. So how do you reconcile those two? I don't know. But I think the fact that the overarching theme of the New Testament is grace implies to me that God has put a safety net in place so that it's safe to fail and we're still held and we can learn from the failure and be restored and be redeemed, you know. And I think about the toxicity in our culture now because of cancel culture and how we're becoming aware of how unhelpful that is. And a part of me is like, well, you know, I've known about cancel culture for years because I saw it a lot in the church, you know. If a pastor fails, he's out. I just don't know that that's the most helpful way of conducting ourselves in the church, out of the church, anywhere, right? It seems anti-grace, anti-redemption to me for sure, but I'm still working it out.
A group of us, small group that I have, a bunch of us guys, one of the phrases that we've adopted is progress, not perfection.
Yeah. You know, I've got that in a song of mine, right?
I'm not going to tell the guy who started it in our group that he might have rifled it off of you, but
sure. It's actually in the opening song of Ordered, Disordered, Reorder. It's progress, not perfection, not shoot. I can't remember it. You'll just have to look it up.
So if it's off order, disorder, reorder, then I'm going to say that you rifled it off of him because he's been saying it for a while now. So,
well, I've been I'd worked it into a couple other songs that never came into fruition until it came here. So maybe it was just out there in the ether, and we both grabbed it. You know?
We'll call it a toss-up. Let's talk about the album a little bit here.
Yeah, cool.
Like I said, as we're getting set up here, one of the things that you really were talking about is just how proud of this album that you are and stuff. Talk about the heart and the life that went into writing this album.
Well, it was time to make a new record. I hope I don't go into boring stories that only a songwriter would be interested in. But I'll say this. Normally I would write 14 songs and 12 of them would end up on whatever album I was working on, you know. But this time around, I thought Bruce Springsteen wrote 86 songs that was whittled down to the 11 that became Born in the USA. Wow. Michael Jackson had over 300 songs in play for the 9 songs that became Thriller. So I thought, what if I just wrote a bunch of songs and paid attention to what rose to the top? So I just started to write and write and write. I wrote about 80 songs. Didn't know exactly what the theme was going to be. Early on, I thought the theme of the album was going to be songs based on phrases I heard that changed everything. For instance, I have a mentor in my life who would speak these things to me, and it would just like rearrange everything in my heart and my mind. A story I have about that is I was on the road with my friend Nathan Johnson, who plays guitar for me. And when we're on the road with each other, we always look for that cool coffee shop in the town, right? So we found this one in Columbia, Missouri. We go there to grab a coffee, and I order my vanilla, lavender, rose petal latte with extra foam, you know. And he ordered a Ristretto Americano, which was this very just black coffee drink. We're hanging out, and I'm like, man, I wish I liked what you like. I've tried for years to just like black coffee straight up, but I like my little frou-frou latte, you know? And he was like, yeah, man, I used to like what you like, but then I just started to feel like I was just drinking a lot of hot milk. Yeah. In that moment, I noticed that I had been enjoying my drink. And then he said those words. I felt like I'm drinking a lot of hot milk. And I took my next drink and I was like, oh, he's right. This is disgusting. It's just a bunch of hot milk. I didn't like it anymore, and I started to drink more espresso-forward drinks, you know. Now, I've been trying to do that for about 20 years, and I couldn't get there. But when I heard that little phrase, it changed everything, right? It changed everything in me. And that began me thinking about the power of words, and I started to comb through my history, thinking of times when I'd heard a phrase that changed everything. And so a lot of the songs were based on that. I thought that's what the album was going to be about. And then I wrote a song called Order, Disorder, Reorder, which was an example of when I heard those words, that I'm being transformed as I move from order into disorder into reorder. Those words changed everything. So that fit that theme. But then when my team heard that song, they were like, oh, that should be what the record's about. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And so I looked through the 80s songs I had and looked for songs that would go in the categories of order and then disorder and then reorder. And that's an important idea to me too, just because I think when I was growing up as a young believer, nobody taught me how to value disorder or failure or brokenness or all those things. Disorder was to be avoided at all costs. It was only something to be rescued from. If it was happening, then something was wrong. You're being attacked by the enemy or all these things, you know. And that teaching of order, disorder, reorder helped me to reset and calm down and have less anxiety and recognize that, well, no, I think that God actually does his best work in me in seasons of disorder where things fall apart. And maybe he allows them to fall apart. Maybe that's just a part of the pattern of transformation, right? Order is when everything is going the way that we expect it to, the way we think it ought to. It's somewhat predictable. We've created order, and order is good. There isn't anything wrong with order, except that if we love order too much, it hardens and it becomes rigid. And we can love order more than truth, more than transformation, right? And we'll start to protect our order. And that's a problem. And in order, we don't learn anything new, right? But don't worry, because disorder is always just around the corner, right? And that enters the equation and breaks everything up and things fall apart. And that's painful and can be confusing to realize that we weren't as in control as we thought we were. And our answers were not as sufficient as we thought they were. And it can be heartbreaking, but maybe it breaks our heart open enough that the Lord is able to get in there and bring in new wisdom. And then that's the beginning of reorder, right? And we've all had this experience when you go through something very difficult and you come out the other side more whole, kinder, wiser, stronger. So that's what the theme of the album became.
That's incredible. With this album, which was the one song that you went into the album, this is kind of like, whatever, but was the one that really kind of caught a hold of you?
That's pretty easy. It's a song off of the reorder part of the album called Right on Time. And that song was an example of a few words that kind of changed everything. I was crying on my bathroom floor at 3 a.m., weeping, crying out to a God that I wasn't sure if he was listening or if he cared or if he was even there. I'd always experienced him as saving the day, sometimes in the 11th hour, and always felt like he had me. And I'd come to a place where it was clear that my marriage was going to end in divorce, and I'd never prayed harder for anything in my life than my family to be spared. I'm laying there on the floor crying out to a God who, I was afraid that my life was slipping through his hands. I heard something in my heart, and it was these words, or what if this is all right on time? What if all these things are converging at this time in your life to break you open enough to make available to you the kind of transformation that you've been praying for years? And that brought a lot of peace to me. I heard it and it felt true. And I realized maybe this is my best hope for saving my marriage. Maybe this pain could transform me into the kind of person who could find the path forward to save my family. And I think that was true. Now, my marriage still ended in divorce, but I don't think that changes the truth of that idea, And that changed everything just because it gave me a lot of peace. Since the divorce, it kind of conditioned my body to experience anxiety differently. Like I didn't sleep for 2 years and I was having to take sleep meds and all kinds of meds to keep my head above water because it was a very traumatic experience. I was afraid all the time. And I came out of it just like with this newly conditioned for anxiety. At different times in my life, when I feel anxious, I'd think, oh, this is bad. Anxiety is bad, But these days when anxiety comes up, I think, oh, all right, here it is, right on time. And the only way that I can really work on my anxiety is when it's present, when it comes up. So now when it comes up, all right, it's an opportunity to work on it a little bit. It's just helped me to be less defensive against the circumstances of my life and to kind of just encounter them head on without as much fear.
And then you were also talking about one song that got cut at the 11th hour.
Yeah, I wrote a song about the story of Bridge Over Troubled Water. Had been playing it live and audiences loved it. It was probably the song I was most excited to record and put on the record because I just knew it would be cool, And we were literally 20 minutes away from uploading the album onto iTunes and Spotify and all those places when we got an email from Universal Music, who owns the copyright to Bridge Over Troubled Water. And they were uncomfortable with how the copyrights would be entangled in the song that I had written. And so we couldn't release it. It was all recorded and everything. It turned out super cool. I was so happy with the way it turned out and stuff. But
man, at the 11th hour too.
Yeah, I'm going to see if we can get permission. I wonder if you could play it on the podcast here. So if people hear it at the end of the podcast, they'll know we got permission. If not, shoot, sorry.
Here's our surprise. Like, I am great with surprises.
Okay.
We just had our third kid, so we wait until the very end to find the genders. So we're always surprised at the very end. So I think we can translate this to here. Like, I love the idea that as we're recording this right now, either we'll play the song at the end of the podcast or we won't. You're just going to have to wait here a few minutes to see if it actually happened or not.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, we are excited to have you as one of the nominees for this year's We Loves. Like I said,
thank you.
I honestly think that one's going to be a toss-up. So just excited to see how that comes out.
Well, I love all those other artists too, and I wish them well, genuinely. But it would be meaningful if this album won that award.
By the time you're hearing this here, the voting will have already been done. So once again, we'll just have to wait until the end of February. Or if you're hearing this after February, we'll know by then. But once again, another surprise yet to happen here.
Yeah.
We definitely thank you for just spending some time with us here. It was very great to hear your story.
Yeah. Thank you for being curious about my life, and good to talk meaningful things with you. And one of the things, I was talking with another songwriter about a week ago, and we were lamenting that, we're kind of tired of, it feels like there's this expectation, maybe it's just an expectation that we put on ourselves, that as a Christian songwriter, we're kind of arriving on the scene with some kind of wisdom that we're going to impart. And so like we're arriving as kind of having some answers or being an authority. I see the value in those kinds of songs. I've written those kinds of songs, but I'm more interested in standing alongside the listener as a fellow pilgrim, saying, I kind of don't know what all this means and how it all works. Here's a few things I think I know, but there's a lot more that I don't know. I kind of like that stance, so.
Absolutely.
And so I brought that up because I feel like our conversation had that quality to it. We're both being curious about how the world works, how the human heart works, how the Lord works. And I think curiosity is the right mode of being.
It isn't just Christianity, just constant pursuit of God. I mean, that's
Constant.
what this is.
It's never an arrival, I don't think.
Not for a while, at least.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this, though. Like, I think we feel the most alive when we're in the midst of transformation and when we're growing, It's not that God is unknowable, but I think he's like endlessly knowable.
Yep.
And it has made me wonder, like, I wonder if we get to keep on learning in heaven. And wouldn't that be wonderful? I hope so. I hope I never stop learning.
That's something that I've never even thought about. And I think that's a great way to end this here, just as a great ponder point of, are we going to continue to learn once we get to heaven? Are we going to continue to grow once we get to heaven?
I hope so.
Same here. Well, once again, we just thank you for hanging out with us for a while.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for hanging out with us for this episode of the NRT Now podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And special thanks to Neon Feather for providing our theme music. Make sure to check out newreleasetoday.com and our socials for more great content. See you next episode.